Time passed more lightly after that. No more court dates. No more counting days waiting for responses. No more feeling suspended between paperwork and signatures. One morning, I went to the garden behind the community center, the place where Harold and I had stood together at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The air was still cold, the soil still hard, but underneath, bulbs had already been planted. Daffodils, irises, crocuses. They were silent, but preparing to bloom. On the old plaque, the inscription was still there. For those who plant for a future, they may not live to see. There was a time I thought that future had been erased by one person's ambition, but it hadn't. It had only been temporarily covered. And now, layer by layer, the soil was being lifted away. On another afternoon, I opened Harold's old drawer and found an unlabeled envelope. Inside was the will from a year before everything was altered, along with his handwritten notes in the margins just for me. About trips we'd take, dinner table conversations, and how the part of legacy more important than money is keeping the original values intact. He hadn't left that version at the courthouse. He'd left it at home, for me. I took it to Marcus and asked him to preserve it. Not to use in litigation, but so history would have a place to set that paper down. A few weeks later, the new board invited me to visit the foundation, not with a title, not for a speech. They simply wanted to hear me talk about the early days, about the true spirit Harold had dreamed of for the foundation. I went, looked through some files, suggested a few small details. As I left, I realized that glass building no longer made me feel small. It was just a shell. The story inside, finally, was back in the right hands. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen, made tea, and sat by the window. I thought about Harold, with all his flaws and all his honest love. Talia, with her quiet courage. Marcus and Desiree, who stood on the side of the truth, not just for a fee. And about myself, the woman who had once sat silent at a will reading, then one day stood up, stepped back into the center of the story, and wrote the ending with her own hands. Spring that year came slowly, but it came. Flowers bloomed in the community garden. The street in front of the foundation burst with early tulips. I received an invitation to the annual fundraising gala, the kind I hadn't attended in years. This time I went. I pinned Harold's little oak lapel pin back onto my collar, not to show off, but to remind myself, some roots grow deep enough that no one can erase them with a single stroke of a pen. At the event, the young host mentioned my name, thanking me for steadfastly protecting the foundation's original mission. The whole room turned and applauded, softly but genuinely. I simply stood, nodded, and sat back down. No more words needed. That night, on my way home, I passed the bookstore Harold used to visit every Sunday. The owner had placed his favorite novel in a spot where everyone could see it. I smiled, not from sadness, but from the feeling that I had finally returned to my rightful place in this life. I was no longer a name crossed out of a will. I was someone who had lived, loved, built, and refused to let anyone tell that story without me in it. If my story reminds you of a time you were belittled, pushed to the edges of your own life, I hope it reminds you of this. Silence is not always weakness, but one day you will need to speak to defend the truth that belongs to you. And if you want to keep hearing stories about people who seemed powerless but dared to stand up and reclaim their voice, their respect, and their place in their families, their legacies, their own lives, hit subscribe and turn on the notifications. Every week, I'll share more journeys like that, sometimes painful, always honest, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find a piece of yourself in them. 4 hours earlier, all of us were still sitting around the dining table. I had baked my own birthday cake, decorated every dish on the table myself, because if I didn't, no one would. Nadine, my neighbor, walked in with a bouquet of fresh flowers and a genuine hug. Only her. She was the only one who remembered today was my birthday. Tyrone arrived late, dragging that woman behind him. They didn't even open their mouths to wish me a happy birthday. They sat down, ate, chatted with each other as if I didn't exist. As if the person who cooked every dish, the person who opened her own home to welcome them in, wasn't worth a single greeting. And then, I finally saw what I had suspected for weeks. I saw her slip her hand into my purse hanging on the back of the chair. I saw her pull out my wallet. I watched those hands calmly take out the bills and tuck them into her coat pocket. In my house, right in front of me, and on my birthday. I shot up so fast the chair toppled over. I screamed, pointed straight at her. I called her a thief. I told her she had been stealing from me for months, that I wasn't crazy, that I had seen the withdrawals on my bank statements, that I had found my jewelry in her room. She stood up, stared at me with those empty, steel-cold eyes, and she told me I was delusional, that I was just a confused old woman, and that no one would believe me. Tyrone stood up too, but he didn't stand with me. He looked at me with disgust, a look that made my spine freeze. He believed her. He believed his wife over his own mother. And then I did something I never should have done. I stepped closer, put my hand on her chest, and pushed. Not hard. Truly not hard. I barely made her shift an inch, but she flung herself backward as if I had struck her with full force. She stumbled over the chair leg, fell to the floor, and screamed. A performance. An absolute performance. But Tyrone didn't see that. He only saw his mother attacking his wife, and the rage in his eyes exploded in a way I had never seen in my life. He grabbed my arm. I tried to pull away. I told him he was hurting me. I begged him, but he tightened his grip. Little by little, he twisted my arm behind my back. I felt bone resisting. I felt something snap, and then came the pain. A blinding, white-hot pain that made me scream until my voice cracked. He dragged me down the hallway while I cried, while I begged him to stop. Nadine shouted from the doorway that she would call the police, but Tyrone didn't stop. He shoved me into the pitch-dark utility room with no windows, then slammed the door shut. I heard the key turn. I heard his voice on the other side, cold enough to frighten anyone. "Learn your place. You don't run this house anymore. I'm the one in charge now, and if you dare touch my wife again, it'll be much worse." I pounded on the door with my uninjured hand. I screamed that I needed a doctor, that the pain was unbearable. He didn't answer. He just walked away. And I stayed there, collapsing onto the floor, clutching my broken arm. I felt it swelling, felt my fingers starting to go numb. I didn't know how much time passed. An hour? 3 hours? It was impossible to tell in that darkness. The pain changed. It was no longer sharp. It sank deeper, heavier, like an animal gnawing from the inside. I thought about the path that had led me here. I remembered the woman I was 30 years ago, when Tyrone was just a little boy, and I worked 2 shifts at the textile factory so he would lack nothing. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing uniforms for others just to afford his private school tuition. I remembered selling the last pieces of jewelry my mother had left me to buy him his first computer. I gave everything, everything, and now here I was, locked up like a dog, with an arm broken by the very child I raised. Do you know what the cruelest part is? Not the fall, not the crack of the bone, but the moment I realized all my sacrifices meant nothing to him, but I wasn't defeated. No, this story doesn't end here. Then I remembered something. I remembered that this morning, before they arrived, I had slipped my phone into the hidden pocket inside my apron. The old apron I used for cooking, the one I had stitched an extra pocket into so I could protect the things that mattered. My right hand, trembling but still functioning, reached into the pocket, and there it was, the phone, small, scratched, with half the screen cracked, but still alive. I pulled it out. The screen lit up, stabbing my eyes with brightness. I had service. I had battery. I could call the police. I could call Nadine. I could call an ambulance, but I didn't. Because right now, With a broken arm, a shattered heart, and a dignity they tried to destroy, I didn't want to be rescued. I wanted justice, and I knew exactly who I would call. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped at a name I hadn't touched in 15 years. A name I'd kept, not because I thought I'd need it, but because deep down, I knew there would come a day I'd have to call. Jared Linton, my lawyer. But not just any lawyer. Jared was the one who helped me when my husband died, when his family, like a flock of vultures, tried every way to take everything that belonged to me. Jared was the one who stood up and fought for every dollar, every asset, every right I deserved. And it was also him who 15 years ago said something I never forgot. Rosalind, if one day you ever need someone to make all your problems disappear, call me, no matter how much time has passed. My fingers trembled as they touched the screen. I dialed. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, he picked up. His voice was exactly as I remembered. Deep, steady, the voice of a man who had seen too many dark corners of life. Rosalind, he said my name, without small talk, without surprise, as if he had been waiting for this call for 15 years. Jared, I answered, my voice both shattered and firm. I need you to come here. My son broke my arm. He locked me in a room. He and his wife have stolen everything from me. And I don't want to forgive anymore. I don't want to be the good mother anymore. I want them to pay for every single thing they've done. Silence on the other end. A heavy silence, intentional. I heard him take a deep breath. Give me the address, he said. And Rosalind, listen carefully. Don't let those ungrateful brats leave that house without paying for it. I hung up. I sat on the cold floor of that dark room, cradling my broken arm, and felt something shifting inside me. Something smoldering, slow, but unstoppable. I was no longer the mother who always begged, no longer the old woman who cried, endured, swallowed everything. I was the woman who had built an entire life from nothing, the woman who had survived poverty, widowhood, and betrayal. And right now, I was the woman who would claim justice for every tear, every blow, every insult. Their laughter still echoed outside, but very soon, that laughter would turn into something else. As I waited for Jared, my mind drifted back into the past, not to complain or wallow, but to remember, to understand why I had been pushed into this moment, to understand each step that had brought me to the threshold of this storm of retaliation. The cramped little room reeked of old cleaning chemicals and damp. Somewhere above, on the ceiling, there was an invisible leak. Every few seconds I could hear a drop of water hitting the concrete floor. Drip, drip, drip. Like a cold clock counting down every second of humiliation. My eyes slowly adjusted to the dark. I made out the faint shapes of a few brooms leaning against the wall, buckets stacked on top of each other, bottles of bleach on a shelf. This broom closet, where I used to keep cleaning supplies, had now become my prison cell, in my own house. The house I bought with my husband's life insurance money. The house I spent 2 years fighting for in court against his siblings, the ones who wanted to throw Tyrone and me out on the street. My arm throbbed with pain all the way up to my neck, burning, swollen. When I tried to move my fingers, they barely responded, as if they no longer belonged to me. I knew it was broken. I knew I needed a doctor. But more important than anything, I needed Jared to come. I needed him to see with his own eyes what they had done. I needed a witness before Tyrone could spin some other story, before that woman completely poisoned his mind. I leaned my back against the cold wall, trying to find a position that hurt less. There was no such position. Every movement sent waves of pain crashing through me. I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing, the way I had been taught in senior yoga class. Those peaceful sessions. That was before she came into our lives, before everything shattered. And this is what I realized in that suffocating darkness. Sometimes, it's not the pain that wakes you up. It's the moment you understand that you've endured too much, and your silence is exactly what has been feeding the monster. I thought about the signs. every little sign I had seen, had felt, but deliberately ignored, simply because I didn't want to believe what they were screaming at me. The first sign began 2 years ago, when Tyrone came back and brought her along, clinging to his arm. Samantha Shields, a pretty name for a venomous snake. She was 32, a full 15 years younger than my son, with bleached blonde hair, nails always perfectly manicured, expensive clothes that didn't match the secretary salary she bragged about. When Tyrone introduced her, she flashed me a big smile, but her eyes were different. They were weighing, calculating how much she could squeeze out of me. At first, her words were subtle. Those fake, concerned comments. "Ms. Rosalind, this house is so big, and it's just you here. Property taxes must be expensive. Tyrone and I could move in with you to help out." Help out? I knew very well that wasn't help, but I still politely said I could manage everything. Tyrone insisted. He said I was getting old, that I should let him take care of me. Old. The way he said it made it sound like being 70 meant I no longer had a mind. So 1.5 years ago, they moved in for good. On a Saturday morning, a rental truck parked right in front of my house. I gave them the 2 largest bedrooms on the 2nd floor, both with private bathrooms. I kept my small room on the 1st floor. I thought it would be nice, that I'd have company, that maybe I'd get to hold a grandchild one day, that I could have a complete family again. I was truly foolish. The first months were still tolerable. Sam cooked sometimes, but always complained about the old pots and pans, the broken stove, how we needed new appliances. Tyrone came home later and later, shut himself in the room with her, talked to me less and less. I told myself it was normal for a young married couple, that I should give them their space. Then things started to disappear. First was my grandmother's silver hairpin. I tore the house apart, thinking I'd misplaced it somewhere, but it never turned up. Then the $50 I'd hidden in my Bible, then $100 from my wallet. Small amounts that made me doubt myself, made me think maybe I really was slipping, just like Sam kept subtly implying in front of Tyrone. One day, I found my jewelry box open. The gold earrings from our 20th wedding anniversary were gone. The necklace I'd bought with my first paycheck was gone too. I went straight down to the kitchen and confronted Sam. She was leisurely drinking coffee, face completely calm. I asked if she had seen my things. She looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes, acting like she meant every word. "You probably sold them and forgot. My grandma was like that too. Old age, you know." I bit my lip, said nothing. But that night, when they went out, I went upstairs to their room. And there, on Sam's vanity, were my things, my earrings, my necklace, and pieces I hadn't even realized were missing. A small ring that had belonged to my mother, a bracelet I rarely wore. I took them all back and hid them in a shoebox in my closet under a pile of old blankets. But I didn't tell Tyrone. I should have. I should have called the police right then. 6 months ago, everything got much worse. My bank statements showed strange withdrawals. $300, $500, small amounts, but added up, they were thousands. I went to the bank. They told me my card had been used at an ATM with the correct PIN, but I never used the card. I always withdrew money directly from the teller. I asked to see the footage, and they showed me Sam withdrawing money using my card, as casually as if it were her daily routine. I changed my PIN. That afternoon, I asked Tyrone to talk in private. I showed him the statements. I showed him the images of Sam at the ATM. I said it straight. His wife was stealing from me. I hoped he would be furious, that he would confront her, that he would protect me. But no, he snatched the papers from my hands, ripped them up, and told me I was crazy, that Sam would never do that I must have given her the card and forgotten, that I was making things up to destroy their marriage. That night, I cried until there were no tears left. My son, the child I raised, did not believe me. He chose to trust a thief over his own mother, and I stayed silent because I was afraid of being thrown out of my own home, afraid of being alone, afraid to admit that maybe I had lost Tyrone forever. Now I could hear footsteps upstairs, laughter, clinking dishes. They were celebrating. In my living room, eating my food, in my house, while I was locked downstairs with a broken arm. The phone was still in my hand, the screen dark, but I held it like the last life raft. Jared had said he would come. I didn't know how long he would take. Didn't know what exactly he would do. But I knew one thing. For the first time in 2 years, someone would be on my side. Someone would believe me. Someone would put an end to this nightmare. Outside, I heard an engine. A car stopped in front of the house. My heart pounded hard. It could be him. It could be Jared. I leaned against the wall, forcing myself to stand despite the pain tearing through my arm. I stood up straight, trembling but resolute. I was ready for it all to end, ready for justice to begin. And in that exact moment, as the engine cut off, as the house above me still rang with laughter, I understood that my fate was shifting. Not because of luck, but because for the first time in my life, I had decided I would not endure it anymore. It all started the day Tyrone told me he had met someone special. 3 years ago, on a peaceful Sunday, I was preparing lunch, and he dropped by like he did every weekend. He walked in with a smile I hadn't seen in a long time, a smile that made my whole body feel lighter. After his first divorce, he had sunk into sadness and confusion. Seeing my son smile again, I was truly happy. He hugged me at the door and said, "Mom, I met an amazing woman. Her name is Sam. I want you to meet her." I immediately asked how they met, what she did, how long they'd known each other. Tyrone said they met at a bar near his office. She worked as a secretary at an import company. She was smart, fun, made him feel young again. He didn't mention that she was 15 years younger than him. That part I would discover on my own later. 2 weeks later, he brought her over for dinner. I spent the entire day cooking: turkey, mashed potatoes, mixed green beans, apple pie, all the dishes Tyrone liked. I laid out the lace napkins my mother-in-law had left me, brought out the good china I rarely used. I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted her to see that my son came from a decent family, hard-working, with values. When they arrived, the first thing I noticed was the clothes. Sam wore a tight white dress, sky-high heels, and a designer handbag worth more than $1,000. I knew because I'd seen it in a magazine. For a secretary's salary, she was dressed far too well. Far too well. But I told myself, don't judge. Maybe she saves up to buy nice things. It's none of my business. She hugged me, wrapped in expensive perfume. "Ms. Rosalind, it's so nice to finally meet you. Tyrone talks about you all the time." Her voice was sweet, soft, perfectly smooth. But her eyes were scanning the living room, evaluating every item, every corner of the house. At dinner, she talked a lot. Too much. Her story about a small Midwestern town, a modest family, coming to the city to chase opportunities, sounded like a speech she had memorized. Tyrone looked at her like a man bewitched. I asked about her job, her future plans, what she was looking for in a relationship. Her answers were vague, cliched, like they'd been written out in advance. After dinner, while I was clearing the table, I heard Sam whisper to Tyrone, "Your mom lives alone in this big house. She must be so lonely. At her age, living alone is dangerous too. What if something happens?" I couldn't catch Tyrone's reply, but his voice sounded full of worry. She was planting seeds from the very first day. The visits became more frequent. Every weekend Tyrone brought her over. They came empty-handed. No wine, no dessert. But I still cooked. I still welcomed them because I wanted my son to be happy. Then Sam started making comments. "These walls really need repainting. The furniture is so outdated. The garden feels a bit depressing." Always with a smile, always in that fake, helpful tone. And slowly, Tyrone began repeating those words. "Mom, Sam's right. You should freshen up the house a bit. I can find some contractors." I said I didn't have money for that. that the house was fine the way it was. But he kept insisting. One Tuesday afternoon, they showed up unannounced. I was out in the yard trimming the roses. Tyrone spoke in a serious tone. "Mom, we need to talk." We sat down in the living room. Sam held Tyrone's hand like she was bracing herself for a performance that was about to begin. "Mom, we're getting married." I was genuinely happy. I hugged him, choked up with emotion. Finally, I would have a daughter-in-law, and maybe someday a grandchild. I thought our family was about to be whole again. I was so naive. Tyrone continued. "And after the wedding, we want to move in with you. This house is too big for you alone. We can help with expenses and maintenance. You'll have company. It's good for everyone." My chest tightened. Something felt wrong. But I saw the hope in my son's eyes, and I couldn't bring myself to say no. "Of course, sweetheart. This has always been your home." Sam flashed a quick smile, brief, cold, triumphant. It vanished in an instant. But I saw it. That wasn't love. That was victory. 3 months later, they got married, a small wedding that I paid for. Sam wanted a classy ceremony at a hotel. Tyrone asked me to help financially because he didn't have enough. So I withdrew $8,000 from my emergency savings. I paid for the venue, the food, the photographer, even her $2,000 wedding dress. Sam bought it without asking whether I could afford it. She just handed me the bill. On the wedding day, she was radiant. I was happy and sad at the same time. But deep in my heart, I felt uneasy. When the officiant asked, "Does anyone here object to this marriage?" For 1 second, just 1 second, I wanted to stand up. I wanted to say I objected. I wanted to say this woman was wrong for him. But I stayed silent. I swallowed my instincts. And in that very moment, I sealed my own fate. 2 weeks later, they moved in. They brought boxes of things, new clothes, decorations, without even asking permission. Sam redesigned the entire second floor, threw out my curtains, changed the paintings, rearranged the furniture. She turned my sewing room, where I spent my afternoons, into her dressing room. I said nothing. I thought she had the right to make her own space comfortable. The first months passed in this awkward tension. A house of 3 suddenly felt strangely cramped. Sam laid down rules. I wasn't allowed to go up to the second floor without knocking. I wasn't allowed to sit in some of her favorite chairs. I wasn't allowed to help her cook because I only made the kitchen messy. My kitchen. The kitchen I had cooked in for 40 years. Tyrone changed. He stopped hugging me, stopped asking how my day was. Whenever I spoke, he looked at Sam first, as if asking her permission. Sam stood between us like an invisible wall, and day by day, that wall grew thicker, and then the thefts began. That was when I realized tragedy never arrives in a single day. It comes little by little, through sweet words laced with poison, through small gestures that seem harmless. And by the time you finally see it for what it is, it's already too late. The first theft I was absolutely sure about was my engagement ring. I had always kept it in a small red velvet box in the top drawer of my wardrobe. It was the only thing I had left of my husband besides memories. A simple platinum ring with a small diamond he'd bought with 3 months' salary. Its market value might have only been around $1,500, nothing like some great fortune. But to me, it was priceless. One morning I opened the drawer to look for it. I wanted to clean it, polish it a bit, like a way of touching those beautiful days that had passed. The box was still there, but inside, it was empty. I tore the whole room apart, trying to reassure myself that I must have misplaced it somewhere. I checked every drawer, every jacket pocket, every dress pocket, reached under the bed, went through old shoes. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I went upstairs and knocked on their bedroom door. Sam opened it in a silk robe that looked more expensive than my entire monthly utility bill. She looked at me with annoyance, as if I had just interrupted something important. I asked if she had seen my ring. She said no, with perfect, innocent composure, then added, Ms. Rosalind, you know at your age, forgetting where you put things is normal. My grandma was the same. Maybe you set it down somewhere and don't remember. Those words, those cursed little phrases that she would repeat over and over, countless times afterward. Every time something else went missing. Every time I dared to complain. She always dragged my age into it. She twisted the issue so it was no longer about being stolen from, but about my old mind. She made me start to ask myself, was I really losing it? Had I become some senile old woman who could no longer trust her own memory? And the worst part was, I started to believe it. I started to doubt myself. But the stealing didn't stop. 2 weeks later, $300 I had hidden in an envelope tucked between the pages of my Bible, money I'd saved to fix a leak in the roof, also disappeared. I confronted Sam again. This time her voice was still soft, but her words were knives. Maybe you spent it and forgot, Ms. Rosalind. What would I have spent it on? I asked. I haven't even left the house in days. She shrugged. How would I know? Maybe you gave it to someone or hid it somewhere else and forgot. Older people do that kind of thing without realizing. I went to Tyrone. I told him about the money, about the ring. I begged him to talk to his wife, told him clearly something was wrong. He sighed, like he was talking to a burden. Mom, Sam is not stealing from you. She has her own money. She doesn't need yours. Maybe you lost it and don't want to admit it, so you're looking for someone to blame. Those words hurt more than anything I'd lost. My own son didn't believe me. My own son spoke to me like I was some liar making things up. I decided I had to be more careful. I started hiding money in different places, between old books, stuffed in a shoebox deep in the closet, slipped into the pockets of coats I hadn't worn in years. But nothing worked. She always found it. It was like she had some invisible radar that existed solely to detect where I hid things. I lost another 500, then 200, then 700 more. Within 6 months, she had drained over $3,000 in cash from me. But money wasn't the only thing disappearing. My jewelry also slowly vanished. My mother's pearl earrings she gave me before she died, the gold bracelet I bought with my first month's wages at the factory, the old brooch that had belonged to my grandmother. Every piece was a small fragment of my life, and she was slowly erasing it. One day, I decided to go into her room while they were both out. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was invading their privacy. But I couldn't take it anymore. I needed proof. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. I waited until Tyrone left for work and Sam went to the salon. I climbed the stairs with my heart pounding so hard I was afraid it might give out inside my chest. I opened their bedroom door. Everything was neat to an almost unnatural degree. The bed was perfectly made, not a single item of clothing out of place. The air was heavy with that sickly sweet perfume she always wore, the kind that gave me a headache every time. I started searching. I opened each drawer slowly, trying to put everything back exactly where it had been. I looked through the wardrobe, full of expensive clothes, high heels, designer bags. Far too many luxuries for someone who was just a secretary. At the back of the closet, under a pile of sweaters, I found a wooden box. I pulled it out. It was locked. I kept searching through the nearby drawers and finally found a small key hidden in a sock. I unlocked the box with trembling hands, and everything was inside. My engagement ring, my mother's earrings, the gold bracelet, my grandmother's brooch, all of my jewelry that had gone missing over the last few months, lying there neatly, like a collection of trophies. But not just that. There were many other pieces of jewelry I'd never seen before. Large, expensive-looking rings, thick gold chains, luxury men's watches. Where had she gotten all of those? How many other people had she stolen from? I also found a stack of paperwork, bank statements in her name, with very large deposits, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Where had all that money come from? There were also pawn shop receipts. She had sold some jewelry. Not mine, thankfully, but someone else's. This was professional work. She was a professional thief. And my son had married her, completely unaware. I took out my phone and took pictures of everything. Photos of my jewelry in her box, photos of the bank documents, photos of the pawn shop receipts. When I was done, I put everything back exactly as it had been and left the room. I went back to my room, sat on my bed, trying to digest what I'd just seen. I had proof. I finally had something that showed I wasn't imagining it, that she really was stealing from me. When Tyrone came home that evening, I waited for him in the living room. I showed him each photo on my phone. I described in detail what I had found, where it was, how I'd discovered it. I waited. I hoped he would be furious that his wife had done something so horrible. I hoped he would call Sam down and confront her. I hoped, at the very least this time, he would believe his mother. But his reaction was the complete opposite. He got angry, but at me. He yelled in my face for daring to go into their room. He said I had violated their privacy. He said all that jewelry was probably Sam's and that I was just trying to stir up trouble. He snatched the phone from my hand and deleted every photo right in front of me. "I don't want to hear any more of these ridiculous accusations," he said, his voice so cold I barely recognized it. "Sam is my wife. If you keep attacking her, you'll have to find somewhere else to live." Those words were like a knife straight to the heart. My son was threatening to throw me out of my own house, the house I bought, the house I'd gone to court and fought for, tooth and nail, to keep. All because I dared to tell the truth about his wife. That night, Sam didn't come down for dinner. She stayed upstairs. But the next day, when Tyrone left for work, she came down to the kitchen where I was quietly drinking coffee. She pulled out a chair, sat down across from me, and smiled, a smile that made my blood run cold. "Ms. Rosalind," she said in that sugary, honey-dipped voice, "I hope we've learned our lesson. This is my house now. Tyrone is my husband. He believes me, not you. So you'd better stop making things up if you want to keep living under this roof." I didn't answer. I just looked at her, and in that moment, I knew I had lost this round. She had won. My son had chosen to believe a professional thief over his own mother. I quietly stood up, left the table, and went back to my room. I cried for hours, but tears changed nothing. Gaslighting doesn't always come in the form of shouting. Sometimes it's those weightless little lines. "You probably forgot. You're remembering wrong." At your age, that's normal. After hearing them long enough, the victim starts to police themselves, to question their own memory, to doubt their own feelings. At some point, they almost apologize for feeling hurt at all. That's when their reality has been completely taken over by someone else. After that, the thefts became bolder. She barely bothered to hide it anymore. One day, I found my checkbook in her handbag. She'd accidentally dropped it on the living room sofa. Inside, there were 3 checks already signed by me. Checks I knew I had never touched. She had forged my signature. When I confronted her, she was utterly unfazed. "You gave them to me and forgot, remember? I even kept the receipts if you want to see." Of course she had receipts. Of course she had already planned her escape routes. I checked my bank account and found that over $15,000 had disappeared. Withdrawals I did not make. Checks I did not sign. I went to the bank and tried to report it as fraud. The manager told me I needed to file a police report. But if I called the police to investigate Sam, Tyrone would never forgive me. And then I would truly be alone. Then she began a different kind of attack, something more poisonous. It wasn't just about money or jewelry anymore. She started to control my life. She decided what hours I was allowed to use the kitchen. She banned me from having visitors over unless I told her first. Whenever Nadine came by, Sam would coincidentally be in the living room, sitting there to listen to our entire conversation, throwing in the occasional snide comment until Nadine felt uncomfortable enough to leave early. Once, she said it outright. "Ms. Rosalind, I think it would be better if your friends didn't come around so often. It disrupts the peace in our family." I gradually stopped inviting Nadine over. I stopped going out. Most days, I barely left my room at all. I felt like a prisoner in the very house I had sweated and sacrificed to own. Tyrone hardly spoke to me anymore. Every day when he came home, he went straight upstairs. We no longer ate together. I cooked for myself, then carried my tray back to my room. They ordered takeout and ate upstairs, as if I had been dead for a long time, as if I had never existed in their lives at all. 6 months passed like that. 6 months of me living like a shadow drifting through my own house. I woke up very early, before they opened their eyes, just so I could use the kitchen without bothering anyone. I made coffee in silence, ate a few bites in a hurry, then retreated to my room and locked myself in for the rest of the day. I listened to the footsteps upstairs, the laughter, snippets of conversations where my name was never mentioned. It felt exactly like living in a hotel where I was no longer welcome, only allowed to exist in the hidden corners. Nadine was the last thread connecting me to the outside world. Sometimes, when Sam wasn't paying attention, we'd secretly meet out in the yard. Nadine would bring me some cookies, tell me about the neighborhood, trying to pull me out of the dark cloud wrapped around me. But I could see the worry in her eyes. I'd lost weight, spoke less, moved slower. My eyes always looked drained, as if someone had siphoned the life out of them. "Rosalind," she said, "this isn't right. That woman is destroying you. You have to do something." But what could I do? It was my word against hers, and Tyrone always believed her. I had lost my son, completely. The little boy I raised, the one I fed spoonful by spoonful, held hands with while crossing the street, protected from bullies, was gone. In his place stood a man who looked at me like a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. Then my 71st birthday arrived. I didn't expect anything. No party, no gifts, no attention. All I hoped was that the day would pass peacefully, without another wound. But Nadine insisted on coming. She showed up at 2 p.m. with a bouquet of flowers from her garden and a hug so tight it cracked the walls I'd built around myself. "Happy birthday, my friend," she said, with such sincerity that tears sprang to my eyes. We were sitting in the living room when Tyrone and Sam came home. I was startled because it was still early, only 3 o'clock. Tyrone almost never left work that soon. Sam was carrying a paper bag from an expensive bakery. She pulled out a small cake, elaborately decorated, but oddly out of place, with a single candle stuck in the middle. "Happy birthday, mother-in-law," she said, wearing that fake smile I knew by heart. Tyrone didn't even hug me. He just muttered, "Happy birthday, Mom," his eyes already looking somewhere else. I blew out the candle only because Nadine was there, and I didn't want to turn everything into a scene. We sliced the cake. Nadine tried to steer the conversation, asking questions, bringing up old memories, but the air was tight as a drawn bowstring. Sam ate while staring at her phone, looking bored. Tyrone finished his slice in 3 bites and said he had to go to his room to take some work calls. Nadine stayed a little longer, then stood up to leave, not forgetting to lean down and whisper in my ear, "If you need anything, call me. Anytime." When Nadine left, the house sank straight into silence. I was gathering the dirty plates from the dining table, trying to keep myself calm. And then I saw it. I saw Sam slip her hand into my handbag hanging on the back of the chair. I watched her take out my wallet. I saw clearly as she opened it and calmly pulled out a few bills, slipping them into her own pocket like she was putting away her salary. No hesitation, no looking around, no guilt, as if it was her right, as if that money had never been mine. Something inside me snapped. Months, years of humiliation, erasure, doubt, gaslighting, all condensed into one explosive moment. I dropped the stack of plates in my hands. The crash of porcelain shattering on the floor made Sam whirl around, our eyes locked. She didn't look afraid, not embarrassed, not guilty, just that same blank, contemptuous stare that had always lurked beneath her sweet daughter-in-law mask. "Thief," I said. My own voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. "You're a thief. I saw you. I saw you take money from my wallet. Just like you've been stealing from me for months, for years." Sam slowly stood up. She slid the bills into her pocket without the slightest hint of shame. "I don't know what you're talking about, Rosalind. You're being paranoid again. You should see a doctor. I think your dementia is getting worse." "I'm not crazy," I screamed. "I just caught you, and I already found my jewelry in your room. I know you've been stealing from me. I know exactly what kind of person you are." Tyrone came rushing down the stairs. "What's going on? Why are you yelling?" he asked. "Your wife is a thief." I pointed straight at Sam. "I just saw her take money from my wallet, and I found all the jewelry I thought I'd lost hidden in her room. She's been stealing from me since the day she walked into this house." Tyrone turned to look at Sam. She instantly raised her hands to her face and started crying. Her tears rolled down in a perfect stream, so controlled they didn't even smudge her makeup. "Tyrone, I don't understand why your mother hates me so much," she sobbed. "I've tried to be good to her. I tried to take care of her, but she keeps accusing me of horrible things. I can't take it anymore." "She's lying," I shouted. "Please, Tyrone, please believe me. Just check her bag. The money she just stole from me is still in there." Tyrone went over to Sam and put a hand on her shoulder. "Can I see your bag, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice softening at the sight of her tears. Sam nodded, still sobbing. She reached into her bag and pulled out some bills. But as she handed them to Tyrone, she said, "This is my money, Tyrone. The money I earned this week. Your mother is accusing me of stealing from her. But this is mine. I have the ATM receipt if you want to see it." Of course she had a receipt. Of course she'd planned every step in advance. She had probably withdrawn the cash that morning just in case. She was too calculating, too cold, too precise in her cruelty. For a moment, I felt my entire inner world crumble. I watched Tyrone believe her. I watched him pull her into his arms. I saw the look he gave me, full of pity, tinged with anger. And I couldn't take it anymore. I walked straight up to Sam. I put my hand on her chest, and I pushed. It wasn't a strong shove. I barely moved her, but she seized the opportunity like a professional actress. She stepped back, letting herself fall as if I'd unleashed all my strength on her. She stumbled into the chair behind her, crashed to the floor, and screamed like I was trying to kill her. "She hit me, Tyrone! Your mother hit me!" It was pure theater. But that wasn't what Tyrone saw. Everything afterward happened so fast, I can barely remember the order. I only remember Tyrone lunging forward and grabbing my arm, my left arm. He squeezed so hard I could feel his fingers digging into my skin. "You hit my wife!" he roared. His breath reeked of coffee. His eyes burned red with rage. "Tyrone, let me go. You're hurting me." I tried to yank my arm back, but he only tightened his grip. He started twisting my arm behind my back. The pain flared, sharp and brutal, cutting off my breath. "Tyrone, stop. You're going to break my arm." But he didn't stop. He kept twisting, kept applying pressure, with a cruelty I never believed could exist in the child I'd carried and birthed. I heard Nadine's voice from the doorway. She had come back because she'd forgotten her glasses. "Let her go! You're going to break her arm!" she shouted. But Tyrone heard nothing except the blood roaring in his ears. He didn't look at me. He didn't hear Nadine. He only knew the anger that had swallowed him whole. And then I heard a dry, cracking sound. I felt something in my arm snap. A blinding white pain shot through my body like lightning. I screamed. I screamed so loudly I was sure the whole neighborhood must have heard. But no one came. No police. No neighbors, only Nadine's desperate yelling outside the door. Tyrone let go of me. He looked down at my arm, hanging at an unnatural angle. For a second, horror flashed in his eyes. Just a second. Then the anger swallowed it again. He grabbed my good arm and dragged me down the hallway. I cried. I begged. "Tyrone, please. I need a doctor. You broke my arm. Please, son. Stop." But he kept dragging me all the way to the utility room door. He opened it and shoved me inside. I fell forward onto the floor, unable to catch myself because of the broken arm. The pain was so intense that for a moment I thought I blacked out. From outside I heard his voice, cold, hard, completely unfamiliar compared to the little boy who once held my hand on his first day of preschool. "Learn your place. You're not the one in charge in this house anymore. I am. And if you ever touch my wife again, it'll be much, much worse." He slammed the door. I heard the key turn in the lock, heard his footsteps fade away, heard Nadine still yelling that she would call the police, heard Sam telling her to go home, saying this was a family matter, and Nadine had no right to interfere. I was left alone in the dark, with a broken arm, with a shattered heart, with the brutal certainty that I had lost my son forever. Sometimes the last straw in a family isn't some big dramatic event, but a tiny moment, a look of contempt, a hand in your purse, one more you forgot again. Outsiders looking in that day might have seen only an old woman pushing her daughter-in-law, a son losing his temper. But only the person inside the story knows. It was the result of hundreds of times being dismissed, hundreds of times being erased, hundreds of times being turned into the crazy one in her own home. And then, when the footsteps had faded, when the shouting outside had quieted, one thought slipped into my mind, clear enough to cut through the pain. I remembered the phone I had secretly slipped into my apron pocket that morning, like a reflex of self-defense I couldn't even fully explain. And I remembered the name I'd held onto for 15 years, Jared Linton. The lawyer who once told me that if the day ever came when I needed to make a problem disappear, I should call him. I fumbled inside my apron pocket with the hand that could still move. My fingers touched the cold surface of the phone. I pulled it out, struggled to unlock the screen, and dialed. When the deep, calm, familiar voice of Jared came through on the other end, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I told him clearly what I needed. Justice, real revenge, and restitution. Every dollar, every shred of dignity, every piece of my life they had stolen from me, everything they had taken from me, I would take back. And this time they would pay. Dearly, very dearly, for every tear, every theft, every insult, for this broken arm, and for everything they had done. Jared showed up exactly 43 minutes after my call. I remember clearly because I had counted every second in that dark room, clutching the phone and trying to hold on to my sanity. The pain in my arm was no longer as sharp as when it was broken, but deep and heavy, reminding me with every heartbeat that my own son had done this to me. The doorbell rang. Then Jared's voice, deep, firm, with no room for argument. "I'm Mrs. Rosalind Jeffries' attorney. You have 30 seconds to open this door, or I'm calling the police for unlawful imprisonment and assault." A moment of silence, then the sound of a key turning. When the door opened, the light from the hallway burned my eyes after so long in the dark. Jared stood there, hair completely white now, older than I remembered, but still commanding. Behind him were Tyrone and Sam. She stood with her arms crossed, annoyed. He was pale, fists clenched. Jared knelt beside me, his eyes taking in my broken arm and tear-streaked face. "We're getting you out of here. Everything will be set right." He draped his coat over my shoulders and called an ambulance. Tyrone tried to say, "It was just an accident," but Jared cut him off. "Shut up. From this point on, anything you say can and will be used against you." While we waited for the ambulance, Jared took pictures. The broken arm, the utility room, the lock with the key on the outside. Evidence. The ambulance arrived. As they wheeled me out, I saw Nadine at the door, hand over her mouth, eyes red and swollen. "I'm going with her," she said. At the hospital, the doctor showed me the X-ray. My humerus was completely broken and would require surgery with metal rods. I lay on the bed, fighting to stay conscious, while Jared stood beside me, his voice patient but firm. "Rosalind, you have to tell me everything. The thefts, the forgery, the abuse, all of it." I told him everything. The jewelry that had vanished, the money stolen, the forged checks, how they had isolated me, made me feel like I was losing my mind. I spoke while the nurses put in IV lines and prepared to wheel me into surgery. I told him I'd once had photos as proof, but Tyrone had deleted them all. Jared only said, "Deleted photos can be recovered. Give me your phone." The surgery went well. When I woke up, Jared was still there, laptop on his knees. "Tomorrow we start," he said. Retention beat. That night, I realized sometimes salvation doesn't come in the shape of an angel. It looks like an old lawyer with white hair and a good neighbor. And for the first time in years, I knew I wasn't fighting alone anymore. My voice would finally be heard. During the 3 days I stayed in the hospital, every morning Jared had new updates. Day 1, he hired a private investigator to follow Sam. Day 2, he brought my phone back. All the photos had been recovered. Day 3, the investigator discovered that Sam was a professional con artist with a record in several states and at least 3 different identities. I felt both vindicated and chilled to the bone knowing my son had married someone like that. Tyrone didn't visit me once in those 3 days, but Nadine did. She told me Sam was packing things into the car, looked like she was preparing to run. Jared acted immediately. Filed to freeze all of my bank accounts, changed the locks while they were out, hired security to stand guard so nothing in the house could be taken out. When I was discharged, he didn't let me go home. He took me to a hotel for my own safety. Nadine stayed the first night, helping me bathe and change. I cried in her arms. The next day, Jared told me he had filed both civil and criminal cases against Sam. He had found a secret account containing over $30,000 she'd stolen from me. I asked about Tyrone. Jared answered plainly. Legally, Tyrone had committed assault and could be prosecuted, but the final decision was mine. 2 weeks later, Tyrone finally called. When he came to the hotel, I hardly recognized my son. Thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, looking worn out. He sat down and spoke right away. "Sam is gone. She took everything, and she left a note admitting she never loved me, that she only used me." It hurt more than it satisfied me. "I told you," I said. Tyrone broke down in tears, confessing everything, breaking my arm, locking me up, treating me like someone who'd lost her mind. "If you want to press charges, I'll accept it," he said. I looked at him. My heart split in two. One part wanted him to pay, the other part was still a mother. Before he left, he added, "You need to see this." He handed me the file Sam had left behind, forged documents with my signature, all prepared to sell the house. Sam hadn't just wanted to steal. She'd planned to erase me completely from my life and take everything. "Give it all to Jared," I said. "It's all evidence." The next day, Jared came with important news. Rosalind, the investigator, has tracked down Sam's trail, or rather, the woman who called herself Sam. Her real name is Alyssa Kendricks. They found her in another state, living with another older man and repeating exactly what she did to you. The police arrested her this morning. She's being extradited back here to face charges. I felt a wave of relief wash through my whole body. At last, she would pay. At last, she would have to face the consequences of what she'd done to me. "And the money?" I asked. "Will we get it back?" Jared nodded. "The bank account she transferred your money into has been frozen. We'll recover most of it. Not all, because some of it has already been spent, but most of it, yes." In the weeks that followed, everything moved very quickly. Alyssa, or Sam, or whatever name she had ever used, was prosecuted. Tyrone went to court and testified against her. I testified. Nadine testified as well. Jared presented all the evidence, the photos recovered from my phone, the forged documents, the bank statements, everything. The case was so clear that she no longer had room to deny anything. Alyssa's lawyer had no choice but to advise his client to accept a plea deal with the prosecutor, plead guilty in exchange for a 5-year sentence for fraud, theft, and forgery. On the day of sentencing, I was in court. I saw her walk in with handcuffs on her wrists, wearing an orange jumpsuit, no makeup, no perfect nails, none of the superior mask she had once worn in front of everyone. She looked smaller, ordinary, faded. When the judge read the sentence, 5 years in state prison, Alyssa showed almost no emotion. She just gave a slight nod. But as they led her out of the courtroom, she turned and looked at me. In that look, I saw pure hatred. Hatred because this time I was the one still standing. Because in the end, she had not managed to destroy me. I got $32,000 of my money back. Not the nearly $40,000 she stole, but still not a small amount. Jared helped me protect my home completely. He went through all the paperwork, making sure that no one could touch my assets without my explicit consent, given in person, in front of a notary. But there was still one unresolved decision: what to do about Tyrone. After many sleepless nights, after countless conversations with Nadine and Jared, I finally came to a choice. I would not file criminal charges against Tyrone, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. And I understood that I would never find peace if I kept clutching this anger inside me. "You're forgiven, Tyrone," I told him at our next meeting. "Not because what you did is acceptable, not because you deserve it. I forgive you because I need peace, and I will never have peace if I carry this fury with me for the rest of my life." He broke down. He cried like a child. I let him cry. I didn't hug him. I didn't comfort him. I let him face, on his own, the weight of what his own hands and words had done. "When you say that, thank you, Mom," he choked out. "I know I don't deserve it, but I promise I'll respect that forgiveness. I'll try to become the son I should have been from the start." I don't know if he'll manage it. I don't know if we will ever return to the relationship we once had. We probably won't. That relationship likely died the day he locked me in that dark room. But maybe we can build something else, a new kind of relationship, based on clear boundaries, on basic respect, on honesty. A relationship in which I never again have to doubt my own worth. My life now is completely different, quieter, smaller, if you only look from the outside, but it's mine, entirely mine. I turned the utility room, the place that was once my prison, into something else. I hired a carpenter to install shelves. I filled them with books, a few small plants, and light. I put in a soft armchair and a reading lamp. Now it's my favorite corner in the house, where I read, where I think, where I write in my journal. I turned the space of my worst humiliation into the place of my deepest peace. I started volunteering at a community center that supports elderly people who are victims of domestic violence and abuse. I tell my story there. I look into the eyes of women going through what I once went through, and I tell them they are not alone, they are not crazy, and they have the right to protect themselves. They have the right to reclaim their dignity. In their eyes, I see a familiar pain. But beneath the pain, I also see a glimmer of hope. Hope that if I could get out, if an old woman like me could start over, then they can too. This is my story. The story of Rosalind Jeffries, a woman who almost lost everything, but in the end got it all back, including herself. And if my story can help one woman, 10 women, or 100 women find the courage to stand up, to speak out, to reclaim their lives, then everything I endured will have been worth it. Because in the end, that is who we are, the ones who survive. We are the quiet warriors. We are the ones who fall but still get back up. We are the ones who cry, then wipe our tears and keep going. We are the ones who know how to forgive, not because we are weak, but because we are strong enough not to let hatred poison the rest of our lives. We are the ones who still find beauty, even after the most devastating storms. This is my story, and I am still writing it, day by day, with dignity, with strength, with hope. If my story has touched you, if you believe women like Rosalind deserve to be heard, please support this channel by subscribing, turning on notifications, and sharing this video with someone you think needs to hear it. Every subscription, every share from you is one more voice being protected, one more woman being reminded that she is not alone.